Hey Ballerinos, welcome back to Reformation Rambles, a series where I tell you all about the history of the European Reformation. Today, I want to talk about the first female regent of the Netherlands. She'd actually governed over the Habsburg Netherlands twice in her life, the second child and only daughter of Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I and Mary of Burgundy, born on the 10th of January 1480. Let's talk about Archduchess Margaret of Austria. Part 1. Lafield de France. In 1482, Margaret's mother died, and her 3-year-old brother Philip succeeded her as regent of the Low Countries. Absolutely wild times, a toddler's running the country, it's fine. Soon after, King Louis XI of France and her dad Maximilian I signed a peace treaty, the Treaty of Arras, where it was agreed that Margaret would marry Louis's son, Charles VIII. And so she was raised as the Fille de France, the daughter of France, in preparation for her to be queen in the future. So she moves to the French court and got a good education with noble children. And over time she did develop some affection for Charles. It wasn't purely political in her eyes at least. But in 1491, Margaret is only 11 at this time, please remember that. Charles renounced the treaty and married his former stepmom, Anne, Duchess of Brittany. Incest alarm. Every video. So she's no longer the future queen, but she's not allowed to leave France. So she's there, aged 11, rejected, feeling like she's let her whole family down and ruined an alliance, because the alliance that this marriage was meant to secure was over. And she has to stay surrounded by people who unequivocally will be supporting her ex. How do you even begin to process that as a child? In May 1493, her dad signed the Treaty of Senez, and she was returned to her family 2 years later. Many people do believe this entire situation just gave her this lasting resentment for the House of Valois. The House of Valois were the royal family in France at this time. Part 2. Asturias. So Margaret's dad wanted an alliance with Isabella and Ferdinand of Spain, who we talked about last week. Just saying. So they negotiated for their only son and heir, John, Prince of Asturias, to marry Margaret, as well as her brother Philip to marry Joanna. Now Margaret's second engagement was doomed from the start. She went to Spain in 1496, and she's still not an adult, she's 16 at this point. This poor lass had a fucked childhood. Her ship hit a storm in the Bay of Biscay, and she was so sure she was going to die, she wrote her own epitaph. Here lies Margaret, the willing bride, twice married but a virgin when she died. But she did make it, she survived, and they were married on the 3rd of April 1497 in Burgos Cathedral. But John died of a fever 6 months later, on the 4th of October. At the time, Margaret was actually pregnant, but sadly she'd have a premature stillborn on the 2nd of April 1498. She had just turned 18, and she was grieving the loss of her husband. She's had one marriage called off, got married, lost her husband, lost her child. That's rough. That's really rough. Part 3. Savoy in the Low Countries. In 1501, Margaret married Philip II, the Duke of Savoy. His lands were in the middle of the Alps, which would play quite a divisive role in the Italian wars that were going on around this time. So he was a handy person to have on side. In 1504, he died of pleurisy. So now she's younger than I am now. She's 23, twice widowed. What? And the grief hit her really hard. She actually threw herself out of a window, but she was saved and she had survived. She had Philip's heart embalmed and kept it with her at all times. Don't even have a comment on that. Everyone called her Dame de Devil or Lady of Mourning. Maximilian then made Margaret regent of the Low Countries when Isabella of Castile died, and he sent his son off to try and claim the throne with his wife Joanna, who was Isabella's heir. Technically, the sovereign was their son Charles, but he was barely out of nappies, so Margaret was set to run the show until he could take over. In 1507, Margaret was made the guardian and educator of Charles and her nieces, Eleanor, Isabella and Mary. At the time, Margaret was the only female ruler. At the time, Margaret was the only woman elected as ruler by the Representative Assembly of Franche-Comté. which was a region she ruled over that's now East France. In 1520, her nephew Charles made her Governor-General of the Habsburg Low Countries, making her the only regent to ever be reappointed to the Low Countries. She's smashing it, right? Part 4. Arts and Business. Margaret was a smart cookie. She had an aptitude for business and maintained the prosperity of the Netherlands. She negotiated the restoration of the Intercursus Magnus, which was a commercial treaty with England that formed the basis of the Flemish textile industry, and that the Low Countries profited hugely from. The Low Countries in this time became a key source of income for the Holy Roman Emperor, so Margaret's father and then nephew. Both bolstered their treasuries with this money that she had brought in. She provided funds and war supplies to Charles's troops, especially against the King of France. He knew how to hold a grudge. And who would you let go, be honest now? She helped him against Protestant reformers. She ruled over a period of relative peace in the Netherlands. This is one of few videos where war isn't a significant factor in her life. Like, it's happening around her, but she's not particularly involved. The only thing really was the rise of Protestantism in the north. The first Protestant reformer was burnt at the stake in 1523. She did briefly find herself at war with France over Charles, her nephew's requirement to pay homage to the French king to claim control of Flanders. Duke of Burgundy basically just didn't want to. In November of 1508, she went to Cambrai, formed the League of Cambrai, very imaginatively named, to help negotiate her nephew's election as Holy Roman Emperor. In fact, initially she'd actually deployed her other nephew, Ferdinand, to become Holy Roman Emperor, but Charles wouldn't withdraw, and through a combination of diplomacy and bribery, Margaret played a key role in getting him elected. She'd returned to Cambrai in 1529, reuniting with the girl who she was mated with all those years ago, Louise of Savoy. Together they created the Peace of Ladies. Not only is there barely any war, she's ending other people's wars. This was a peace treaty between Holy Roman Emperor Charles V and the King of France, Francis I, and she negotiated Charles's side, obviously. She may have technically had less power than him, but he would be completely screwed without her. She's also a grand arts patron. Bob, everyone's an arts patron. Correct. It's the Renaissance and they have money. Once she was declared governor of the Netherlands, she bought the Hof van Sauvage, which she found too small. Eat the rich, even the cool ones, right? And in 1507 she began expanding it. And from 1517 to 30, the architect Rembrandt Keldermans moved the project along Kaiserstraat and modified what would become the rear wing, which faced Margaret of York's palace, which I just thought was interesting. She kept several painters in her home, including the master of the Legend of Magdalene and Peter von Koetzle. She had a rich library, included missals, poetry, historical and ethical treatises, and several songbooks from various composers. Her favourite was Pierre de la Rue. The court was visited by great humanists like Erasmus and Adrian of Utrecht, who'd become pope, and her mook, Cornelius Agrippa. The cat is slamming her bowl against the wall, if you're wondering what that noise is. He produced a feminist work. It's 16th century feminism, don't get too excited. It's very flawed, but it's called Declamation on the Nobility and the Preeminence of the Female Self, and it was dedicated to Margaret. She sent several music manuscripts by Pierre Alamir as gifts to relatives and to strengthen political relationships. One of the first collections of objects from the New World, which, yeah, that's stolen and it's bad, but people at the time were very impressed by this. On the 1st of December 1530, Margaret died. She was buried alongside her second husband at Bourg-en-Bresse in the mausoleum of the Royal Monastery of Brau. She'd commissioned the grave herself, and she is mostly remembered fondly. This day there's a statue of her next to the Cathedral of Mechlin. And that's the story of Margaret of Austria. I really hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please give me a cheeky like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you think of Margaret. Was she a feminist icon, or did some of the stuff she did end up being really dark? I feel really bad for her in her younger years. I really do. But I'd love to hear what you guys think. And I'll see you guys soon. Bye!